Hey friend, thank you so much for being here with me today. I kind of wanted to apologize for my absence on here. I have been really sick with a chronic illness and it's been flaring up. So I feel like I'm kind of on the mend and I hope to get back to making videos regularly on here. I know I also haven't been very active in Ancient Soul Gardens for all the portal members. So I hope to kind of be active everywhere now that I'm feeling a little better. But today I wanted to make a video all on the 3 bodies and the 5 koshas. This is a very fascinating concept in the yogic and Vedantic framework of just really understanding how we truly are so much more than this physical body, right? It's something that once you really grasp the concept of, it really helps you go so much deeper with your spiritual practice and integrate so much of what you're really learning, right? So I wanted to kind of get into all that today, how we can really learn about all of the different layers of the self. So I wanted to start off with the 3 bodies. Now, the 3 bodies aren't necessarily these kind of separate layers. They are really interpenetrating layers through which the self lives and experiences. So they are really all kind of connected in a way. So within the 3 bodies, we have the physical body, the subtle body, and the causal body, which of course the causal body is going to be our most kind of subtle type of body. And again, understanding the way each one functions within us can really help deepen our spiritual practice. So the first one, of course, is just the physical body. And this is just what you think of when you think of the actual, like our actual flesh and bones, right? So this kind of physical, literally the physical body that we live in. And of course, we nourish this through things like food and even like yoga asana practices, right? This is kind of how we help nourish and regulate the physical body. It includes things like our muscles, bones, our organs, our skin. Again, anything that you can think of that we can essentially physically see is another way to put it. So it's tangible, you can touch it, and we can operate on it. It's just a very physical, tangible body, right? That most of us do identify with. But sometimes the problem with identifying with it too much is that we can lose sight of the kind of more subtle essence that lives within us. So again, as I mentioned, there are obvious ways that we can regulate this body on a daily basis, like even things like going on walks, grounding, and of course the food we eat, making sure that we're eating mindfully. All of these are ways that we nourish the physical body. Next, we move into the subtle body, which is going to be, again, the kind of second type of body. The subtle body is a much more refined layer of our being, and really this is where so much of what kind of dharmic healing really entails. When we kind of go within and understand the nature of the mind, a lot of chakra work is the work we do with the subtle body, right? The kind of the energy centers of the body. Pranayama, again, too, if you've ever done pranayama, which is essentially just a yogic breath work. This is what helps influence the subtle body. Any kind of like more subtle energy work is what really helps us work with the subtle body. And again, this is not anything that we can physically see, but oftentimes, when people do, for instance, a yoga asana practice, which is obviously like a very physical practice, a lot of the times people report these kind of improved moods, like less in depression, less in anxiety, is because they're actually working on these subtle kind of channels within the body. So, I always say like people will go to yoga for what they believe are physical benefits, but they oftentimes stay for these kind of spiritual and subtle healing benefits that they get. Again, it's because they're working with this kind of subtle body. This body is often where our moods shift and our intuition rises. But again, it's invisible, so we're not always understanding, how that happens, because it's within. It's not like a physical kind of a practice that we do, again, when we're doing any kind of work on the physical body. So again, this is where so much of these kind of dharmic healing modalities do come into play, like whenever we are doing pranayama, any kind of energy work with the chakras, or even to sometimes different, the work with the nadis, things like that. And lastly, we have the causal body, which holds the deepest seed really of our entire being. It is shaped so much by our samskaras, our kind of past thought impressions and experiences that we've had oftentimes, again, unknowingly, because these are prior experiences that we've had. It carries patterns that often feel very mysterious and deeply rooted. And we can connect with this body through just deep inner silence and different concentration techniques. And oftentimes, whenever we are just going through a spiritual awakening, we are able to tap into this subtle layer. By touching it even briefly, we experience a sense of deep inner peace, stillness, and we really are able to transcend so much of what we experience every day in this kind of 3D world. Next, we move into the 5 koshas, and I always like to look at the koshas as the kind of 5 layers that surround the 3 bodies in a kind of like way that you would think of those Russian nesting dolls. So it's kind of like a body within a body within a body. So that's kind of like the easiest way that we can understand the way that the 5 koshas work. So the first kosha is called the Annamaya kosha, also known as the physical sheath, and it's also referred to as kind of like the food body. So it's made up of the food we eat, the water we drink. It includes our digestion, our strength and flexibility, and again, any other kind of physical experience that we can think of. Next, we have the pranamaya kosha, also known as the energy sheath, and we experience this layer whenever we feel like we have a lot of energy, or maybe the opposite, whenever we're feeling very kind of undernourished or depleted. So again, this is a more subtle and energetic layer that we can again also tap into and tune into whenever we practice things like energy work, so working on the chakras or pranayama, or again any kind of more subtle practice. Even chanting mantras can also help really nourish this kosha. Next, we have the manomaya kosha, which is made up of the mind and emotions. And of course, as you can imagine, it mostly consists of any kind of mental impressions that we have, so any kind of experiences relating to the mind. This includes things like thoughts, emotions, and sensory impressions. It shapes how you perceive the world and also how you respond to it. So again, there are many spiritual practices that we can implement to help really align us with this sheath, right? And there are different concentration techniques that you can do. I personally really like journaling to help balance this sheath, but again, it's usually all very personal. And the main idea here is understanding how subtle it is and how, it's not going to, we're not going to use the same kind of spiritual practices for balancing the other ones, right? So this is just the important thing to keep in mind, is that each sheath is going to require a different kind of experience in order for us to really to tap into that certain layer. Next, we have the Vijnanamaya kosha, also known as the wisdom sheath. And this, of course, governs anything related to our wisdom, our intuition, and those kind of sensory impressions. This is the layer of higher knowing. So having a lot of discernment is going to be really important. And my favorite way to really work with this sheath is just through a lot of contemplation practices. So sometimes I'll actually just go outside and sit in nature and literally stare at nothing and just kind of staring into the void, which I can make some content on that, because that also is another kind of tantric practice that, again, we can use, right? They oftentimes, a lot of the tantric practices overlap, of course, with these yogic practices, they're sister sciences. So just kind of contemplating and feeling like you are one with all that exists. It doesn't even have to be in a traditional meditative way. This is my personal favorite way to work with this sheath. Next, we have the Anandamaya kosha, also known as the bliss sheath or the bliss body. And of course, this is incredibly subtle, and we experience this when we are in very heightened spiritual states and we truly feel one with all that exists, because ultimately this is the main kind of message that Vedanta and all these kind of Vedantic frameworks point to, is that there is just this one consciousness, like this one universal consciousness. So when you really feel one with all that exists and are able to really, again, tap into this subtlemost layer. And of course, this is a state where there is essentially like no mind. So there's no ego. Of course, that's very important, because when we dissolve ourselves of the ego, we are able to access the capital S self. And that's when all of our spiritual practices really make sense, and we're just able to feel one with all that exists. And this is, again, an incredibly, as you can imagine, beautiful and powerful state to tap into. It's oftentimes, whenever we are doing all these spiritual practices over many, many years, that this is the kind of layer that we want to experience the most of. It's like a thin veil of bliss that surrounds pure consciousness. That's another way that I like to look at it. So, of course, the kind of overlap now that we see between the two is that the physical body overlaps with the Annamaya kosha, the subtle body with the Pranamaya, Manomaya, and Vijnanamaya kosha, and the causal body with the Anandamaya kosha. So, of course, that is how they overlap, and that is kind of where the similarities are. And of course, every layer affects every other layer. And that's why I like to liken it to one of those kind of Russian nesting dolls. So again, there are many ways to work with each of the bodies and the koshas. And how you choose to do that is, of course, going to be unique. But that's the important part to keep in mind, is that there are going to be different spiritual practices for each one. That's kind of the beauty of really tapping into these kind of different bodies, and just understanding that we are just so much more than this physical body that we see and touch and just experience in everyday waking life. So that was it for today's video. I hope it was insightful. Again, I plan on being on here more regularly. I've gotten some messages, and just rest assured that if I ever do kind of take a break, it's because I'm really not feeling well, because I'm having flare-ups, and doing everything I can to kind of get my health back in check. So I hope to talk with you very soon. See you next time. Bye.